Right, good evening all. Thank you very much for attending on a Friday evening about weight training for cycling. We have got Chris with us, who will give us a bit more information about this. But I first met Chris on our autumnal Ride of the Falling Leaves ride a few months ago. And we started chatting about weightlifting and his adventures off the bike. And I thought it'd be really good to get Chris along to kind of see where weight training can improve our performance on the bike. So I'll hand over to Chris, where he will be able to start giving us a bit more information.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, I'll just give you a little bit of background about myself. I've been a strength and conditioning coach and personal trainer for over 20 years. I've worked with a lot of general population clients, but also in Premiership rugby, some Olympic athletes, and more recently I've done some work with GB triathlon. I've sort of developed a real passion for cycling in the last few years, and I think for me, I just really want to try and broaden people's knowledge of strength training and how it can certainly help people get a lot more from their cycling. So if I can just share a screen.
Should be able to.
Yeah, hang on 1 second. Where are we? Okay, lovely. Okay, so if we look at the benefits of strength training for cyclists, I'm going to start with what I think is probably the most important, and that's sort of decreasing injury risk. As cyclists, we want to be spending time on the bike, and we want to be cycling, and in order to do that, we need to stay injury free. And strength training can play a really big role in that. And so strength training sort of increases the structural integrity of our soft tissues, of tendons, of ligaments, of cartilage. And this goes a long way to reducing the likelihood of overuse injuries. And I'm sure Lucy would agree that they're often seen in cyclists. Heavy strength training will also increase our bone density. So, cycling has a zero impact, so we don't get any increase in bone density from cycling, unlike running where we've got force going through the spine. We don't get that with cycling. So it's important that we balance that with some form of training, especially as we get older, that's going to maintain that skeletal structure and skeletal strength. And finally, we fall off our bikes. It's inevitable. It happens. Strength training will help us maintain muscle mass and strengthen around the joints. And while it's not going to stop us getting injured, it will go some way to helping maybe lower the severity of those injuries. So that's firstly one of I feel the most important benefit. Secondly, it improves our efficiency on the bike. So heavy strength training can sort of directly improve performance on bouts of exercise, high intensity bouts less than 5 minutes. So you get greater force output for the same energy cost. Okay, so that's especially noticeable on high torque efforts. So sprinting, hill climbs, we can really see the benefits of strength training there. And you also get much faster recovery between those bouts of exercise. And core strength is something that's sort of spoken about a lot in the fitness industry. And having a strong core on a bike will help us transfer force from the body into the bike and help us go forward. So it'll minimize those energy leaks. So if the analogy of trying to fire a cannon out of a canoe, it's not going to work that well. What we want to be doing is we want a really strong, stable platform for those levers to be working so we can develop as much force as possible. And finally, probably the most obvious of the three benefits is an increase in sprint power. Now, the sprinters are you know, a lot of sprinting is genetic, but you will find that, you know, the top sprinters do include heavy strength training in their winter training. And research has shown that just 10 weeks of heavy strength training can improve peak power by up to 25%. And that's a pretty huge increase in peak power from a relatively small amount of training. And also, as well as that peak power increasing, our repeatability of that peak power is increased. So it enables us to produce multiple attacks during a race, cope with a hilly course, and continue to produce force. So ultimately what we're looking at is, you know, more force results in more power on the bike. Okay, will strength training make me heavier and slower? I think this is something that's
Chris,
still,
before you might want to swap your screens around because you're showing the other view. I can
just drop down one.
that one.
It's not changed for us. It's not
No.
changed for me.
Is it not?
No, we're still on the the first page.
Yeah.
Benefits of strength
Okay,
training.
hang on a minute. Let me just try again. Sorry, guys.
That's all right.
Got it.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, that's better.
Sweet. Okay, will strength training make me heavier and slower? I mean, I think this is still something that sort of flies around the cycling fraternity. In simple terms, no, not if the strength training is performed correctly. So we're looking at high load, low rep protocols, and we're trying to increase neural adaptations rather than a large increase in lean muscle tissue. So we're trying to get people stronger and not bigger. So will it make us slower? So there's no direct increase in FTP from strength training, but it will do several things that will help us get fitter on the bike. So increasing our robustness, durability, longevity, it means we can train for longer. We can train for longer without getting injured, and this will help us get those aerobic adaptations and get fitter and increase our FTP. In addition to that, we can get more intensity out of those short bursts. We can get higher force, and we get an increased training effect, which will again help to improve our FTP. And finally, that increase in power. So business end of a race, a big hill, we've got an extra gear. We can produce those high power outputs and ultimately go quicker. Right, has it changed or not?
Yeah, good. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, I'm sure you've seen this slide flying around before.
No, I haven't seen it. No.
Why does my back always hurt? And and then the position where you see them on a bike for extended periods of time, especially if we're desk bound. Ultimately we're sat in this slightly forward flex position, and then we tilt ourselves forward by about 90 degrees and jump on a bike. So in order to build a foundation on a bike, we need to base it on a foundation of good movement. And I know you as a cycling club, I think you offer yoga once a week.
Yeah, we do yoga once a week. Yeah,
which is awesome. Yeah, it really goes a long way to helping sort of address those mobility issues. But changed again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've nicked this slide from British Cycling. So it is slightly misleading. So we're looking at the importance of the relative qualities, not the amount of time we spend doing them. But, in simple terms, what we're saying is that we need to build on a foundation of good range of movement. And if we can get good range of movement and good control of that range of movement, it allows us to layer on top of that good physical qualities, and then we can spend a load of time on our bike training. We flip that upside down. We spend hours and hours on our bike, but we do that on a base of poor strength and poor range of movement and poor control. you know, best case, we're not going to get the best out of our cycling. Worst case, we're going to end up seeing someone like Lucy and
Cost you lots of money.
cost you loads of money, and we're going to have time off the bike, and you know that's you know ultimately the last thing we need. So how do we strength train? So what we're looking at is ideally 1 to 2 sessions a week. These can be relatively short, 30 to 40 minutes. We want to include.
Mine is not 30 to 40 minutes, Chris. Just got that in there.
Yeah, you've got a lot to work on. You've got a lot to work on, Luce. We are looking at compound exercises, so squats, deadlifts, split squats. You know, these are the ones that are going to have the greatest transfer to performance on the bike. We do want to include some upper body exercises. I know cyclists aren't well known for their upper body strength, but you know, having that stability and that ability to produce torque into the handlebars will help us produce force through the lower body as well. So perform core exercises, you know, planks, bridges, loaded carries, and we need to lift heavy. And I think this is one of the most important things. The caveat to that being we need to have good technique before we start loading those patterns. But to elicit the changes that we want to have the greatest effect on improvements in cycling, our rep range needs to be in that strength range. So less than 8 reps. Any more than that, it sort of edges into more hypertrophy, and we're looking at more increasing the lean muscle tissue, which is, you know, from a pure cycling perspective, not something we really want. We don't want that weight gain. So lower rep ranges, and we need to have long rest periods. And I think this is something that endurance athletes struggle with, because we don't feel like we're doing a workout. You know, we want to be hot, sweaty, broken come the end. And if you're taking 2 to 3 minute rest between sets, it doesn't really feel like you're working hard enough. But in order to elicit the adaptations that we want from lifting heavy loads, we need to rest enough to be able to lift the heavy load again, and be able to lift it with intent and lift it quickly. So it's really important that we stick to that. And I think, you know, ultimately the cardinal rule of any training program is consistency. And the same goes for time on the bike, mobility work, or strength training. We need to be consistent with it. And if we're consistent with it, we will get adaptations and we will get improvements. Strength training and fatigue. So it's sort of where do we drop it into our training, in our winter training. Winter's a great time to do it. You know, we're doing a lot of base training, and we can't get outside as much. So it's a good time to increase our strength. Now, there is an element of residual fatigue to strength training. So we will get some muscle soreness. I think Andrew will testify that he couldn't walk for about 3 days after his first session, but that was...
and the rest.
Okay, yeah. I was being nice. So, you know, we need to make sure we're smart about where we plan our strength training, where we put it into our week. You know, ideally, the day after, we want to be following it with a really gentle zone 1, zone 2 session, or complete rest. If we've got a very intense training session on the bike planned, get that in the day before your strength training. So we're trying to minimize that effect. There's an inevitability when we first start training and our training age is relatively low, that there's going to be quite a lot of muscle soreness. That this will, you know, it won't last. It will get less severe. When you introduce new exercises, new loads, there is an element of muscle soreness. So we want to do it in a time when it's going to have the least effect on our cycling. So certainly 48 hours before a longer ride, or even longer before a really intense session. Right, let me just slideshow. Cool. Right. I guess I sort of need to talk a little bit about what I do and what I offer. Sort of a little bit of a sales pitch as a coach. You know, I think if you can take from this, you know, that you should include some strength training, however small. I think it's really important that if you can get that into your winter training, it'll have a really positive effect. I, as a coach, I offer individual strength training programs. Lucy is someone who's following my training. So what I do is I'll have a consultation. We figure out goals, time constraints, equipment constraints, how we best fit it into your lifestyle, and then training is planned around you. Sent to your phone via an app called the Bridge Athletic app, which has exercise videos, teaching cues, and reps, sets, loads, and also allows tracking, so you can sort of interact with the coach. So that is something I do. If anyone's interested in, obviously just drop me a DM or grab my email address off Andrew. Also my Instagram, barbells and bikes, I will be putting sort of tips up on mobility and strength training, if anyone's interested. Now, what I'd like to do now, I mean, there's not a huge amount of us, but if anyone's got any questions for myself, or if it's, I mean, Lisa might jump in if there's anything more specific to injuries, then give me a shout.
Injuries I could speak all day about. You obviously, nutrition plays a massive part of it. What's obviously, if you're starting weight training, you need more protein, you need more carbohydrates.
Yeah, I think if we can aim for, I mean, they sort of say 2 kilos per kilo of body weight per day when it comes down to protein. If that's our base, if we can aim as a top end for that, you know, arguably we probably won't quite get there, but you know, we're trying to support, you know, protein being the building blocks of muscle. It's also important that we include carbohydrates in there. We need energy to build strength and to build muscle and to have quality training sessions. And I know, you know, carbohydrates get a bad rap. But they're really vitally important if we're looking at having quality training sessions.
Would you say you would be looking for similar nutrition pre strength training session as you would before, say, a bike session on the turbo or something like that? Especially for like power stuff. Yeah,
power stuff, certainly. I think, you know, if we're looking at really fast, powerful movements, then yes, you know, any training session we want to be getting, we don't want to be depleted energy to be our limiting factor.
Yeah.
So certainly, you know, carbohydrates in the hour beforehand.
Yeah.
You don't need to have anything in the session itself, yeah. But certainly prior to the workout, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, obviously, I've had a background about weightlifting, so I'm pretty comfortable with the movements, the power movements, that kind of stuff. But if someone is a cyclist, and obviously a lot of endurance people don't really tend to go into the gym, how would they get to know the movements and the kind of skills you need to do, and the techniques? For example, it's how to do a proper squat, how to do a proper deadlift without pulling it back. What's the tips and tricks there, or is it that one of those things that you need to kind of? I mean,
it's hard to answer that question because obviously there's a huge amount of individual variance and individual difference. You know, one of the things I am going to try and do on my Instagram page is look at sort of key exercises and how we address basic teaching cues and teaching points. So, but in terms of, you know, do we need to access the gym to get adaptation? Certainly not. I think, you know, especially with people who haven't spent much time in the gym and don't have the training history like yourself, we don't need their heavy strength training doesn't necessarily mean they need to be adding a huge amount of load. And things like single leg exercises, split squats, Bulgarian split squats will often be enough to initially elicit enough adaptations for them to get a benefit from it.
Yeah.
But technique wise, that's something that, you know, ideally you need some element of coaching.
Okay.
But when because what I've done with mine is send you videos and then you've fed back on that based on my shocking form. But I think sometimes, like, thinking about exercises, whether you need to be in the gym or whether you can do it at home and stuff, I think it just depends on your baseline. So if you've not done any form of weight training before, actually perhaps doing some stuff at home just with a kettlebell and just going through the movement patterns is plenty, and you'll gain performance and reduced injury risk from that. And maybe that's even a better idea, just to build up some foundation. Absolutely. But then once you've done that for a little bit, or if you've got some experience, then that's when you go on to do more specific power-based, technique-driven stuff in the gym to get the changes in performance.
It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, Lucy, that you have been using Chris for a wee while.
Yeah, so I don't know how many. I've done one 6 week. No, it's probably 6 or 7 weeks, isn't it? Now?
Yeah, I think 7 weeks.
And have you? I guess your background cycling as well. Have you noticed? Yeah. Have you noticed a difference? Have you noticed, for example, you do a hill regularly, and the first time you did it, and now you're 6 weeks in, do you feel the difference?
Yeah, well, to be completely honest, I get soft in the winter and I don't go out much. So
you're hoping for massive gains come the spring, yeah?
Yeah, well, this is what I mean. When it comes to spring and I start to get out on the road again, I'm expecting big things. But I've just been doing trainer road. So, I mean, trainer road never really gets any easier for me. But it's hard to tell with that. But I mean, I'm certainly loving doing the strength training, like really, really enjoying it, and having some structure. You know, I've already got a bit of knowledge about exercises, and I've already been doing strength training for probably a couple of years, but I just go through the same motions, you know, the same set of exercises, might add an extra kilo or two here and there. But what's been great with Chris is it really mixes it up. And what I was saying to him is, from a physio point of view, I do the exercise and I go, why is he giving me this? What is it working on? Because it's often, and really interestingly, he combines a lot of mobility stuff with strength stuff, which is so good and so important, but it does take a bit of creativity. But it keeps it really interesting. I know I was moaning that it takes me probably 55 minutes to an hour to do each session, but it goes so quickly because it's just different stuff all of the time, not the same boring exercise that I would normally do.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. Well, I guess this is probably a question for you, Lucy, I guess, because two out of the people on this call, including myself, had a crash recently. How do you use weight training as a part of the rehab, or how do you obviously if you're crashing the bike, how do you see that getting back into the gym? Do you use that kind of techniques and those kind of methods?
I guess it depends entirely on what the injury is. You know, some things you'd really want to load quite heavily, and other things you need to go through a real gradual time frame, depending on if it's a broken bone or if it's a tendon injury or if it's a muscle injury. So it really does vary to what the injury is. But I always think when you can, avoiding these injuries is best. When Chris was saying at the beginning, injury prevention, can't prevent falling off your bike. That's just bad luck a lot of the time. But if you are, Chris is exactly right. There's a huge case of osteoporosis in cyclists. So reduced bone density, because you're just not loading your bones. You're not getting that shock through your bones. When you get the shock through the bones, you get osteoblast formation, which is just new bone that's being produced. It reminds your body how it needs to work. But if you're not getting that shock through your bones, and I'm a prime example. I'm active, but I hardly ever walk. You know, I hardly ever run. My fitness is good, but my bone density, was I not to do the strength training, would be shocking. And specifically from a female point of view, it's even more important. So yeah, you can certainly increase your bone density and even your tendon strength, and tendon strength will reduce your risk of like tendinopathy and muscle strains and stuff you just don't gain from the bike. There's a lot you don't gain from the bike that you need to do off a bike.
That's really quite interesting, actually. Really quite interesting. Does anybody have other questions? Because I could ask questions all evening, guys, on the call. Silence.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
How many times a week are we, what's the research saying with number of sessions per week? When I looked at it from an injury prevention point of view, it was 2 to 3 strength sessions a week. Is that the same for power gains and performance?
Yeah, I mean, one to two is enough.
Okay, cool.
And and we have sort of residual training effects. So how long we maintain those physical qualities upon cessation of training varies dramatically from physical quality to physical quality. So, if we stop strength training, we can maintain that strength for 25 to 30 days. Our power and our peak power will drop off much quicker than that. So power training, we need to be getting in once or twice a week. You could get away with one strength training and maintain it.
Yeah.
If we're looking at improving it, realistically 2 sessions a week would be right.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think we've got a question, Adam. You're on mute, Adam.
You're on mute.
Still on mute, mate.
Okay.
There we go.
It's more of a comment rather than a question, but it's just it's about how linear cycling is, and particularly when you get to like my age, I'm a lot older than Andrew. I don't know how old Willie is, but I'm a lot older than Andrew.
34. 34.
So am I.
But I think the kind of chaos of doing weight training is important, because if you just cycle, you're just doing everything in linear, in a linear direction. It's the same, almost the same with running. I mean, you get people that run and cycle, and as I think it's interesting what you said about you hardly ever walk. I've got a dog, so I have to walk my dog. But if it wasn't for walking my dog, I wouldn't walk. I mean, I just wouldn't. So yeah, I think it's basically, I'm sort of rambling now, but I think it's from my perspective, the exercises I do tend to be running and cycling, so I'm very conscious that I need to do something that is non-linear.
Out of curiosity, Adam, because you're predominantly cyclocross, right? Do you think you'd benefit from weight training to get that power? That obviously cyclocross is carnage at the first 2 minutes. So do you reckon you could benefit from weight training and kind of understanding where like one-legged stuff, the power stuff would come in?
Well, I started weight training about 2 years ago. So I don't do specific cycling weight training, but I do a lot of deadlifts, a lot of squats. Yeah. But I'm not following a structured cycling training program. The other thing that I would like, I'll come back to your question in a minute, Andrew. But one thing I would like to say is that I'm hypermobile, which not everyone is, but I'm hypermobile. So my perception of my own body is just absolutely appalling. I don't know if anyone, well, you guys you guys are experts from there about hypermobility, but if not, it's a little bit like you're dyslexic with your body. So even now I've been doing it for 2 years pretty regularly, and I kind of would trust myself now after 2 years to go and do stuff in the gym by myself, but I really like to have someone checking my form. Of course. So I'd be very skeptical to do stuff by myself, and I do the weight training I do is in a group class with an instructor. It changes every time. I do 1 or 2 sessions a week, and I think having someone checking your form is really crucial. Yeah. Coming back to the cyclocross, I was pretty weak. I was very weak, particularly upper body. So typical cyclist, done a lot of cycling over the years, had virtually no upper body strength. And I think what you're talking about, the upper body torque, is really useful for cyclocross, particularly when it's muddy, because you are fighting with the bike, basically. Yes. So I mean, I've come here to I'm a massive advocate of it. I came to it late in life, and I really quite regret that I didn't start doing this earlier. But if anyone's thinking about doing it, I can highly recommend doing structured weight training, because I think it really helps you on the bike. I mean, it helped me, but I was particularly weak, so maybe I'm not typical. But there are a lot of cyclists that probably have never done it, and just 1 or 2 sessions a week, if you can fit it in, particularly in the off season or the winter season, I'm sure would be of great benefit. So yeah, that's really,
Thank you.
that's not a question, more of a ramble. Sorry about that.
I've got a quick question.
Yes.
I'm quite time pressed in my training. So I always try and make things an hour. It's just because of lunchtime. We've got access to a gym at work.
Yep.
So like following on from Adam, the only weights I ever do are either a kettlebells class or a body pump class, which is like the opposite to what you say, which is high reps and low weight, right? So I'm just wondering if I ditch that class, would it be better to just, I've got 45 minutes. Is it better to just concentrate on a few muscle groups, or is it still better to just go heavy on all the muscle groups?
I think you know those classes are great in terms of, you know, there isn't a, you know, there isn't a you just get stronger or you just get bigger. You know, there is a crossover, and there will be an element of strength gains from doing those classes, but it's limited. You know, there's a point past which where you need to lift greater loads in order to get the adaptations that we're looking for. And not only that, but you need to be lifting loads quickly. So you need that element of power. So you need to include jumps, single leg jumps, you know, various Olympic list derivatives, you know, more technical. It doesn't have to be more technical, but jump based stuff. So we're not only trying to increase force, but we're trying to increase force quickly. You know, you know, at the start of a race, we want to be able to apply that force, but we want to apply it quicker than everyone else, so we can get ahead of them. So I think yes, for you, you know, I would say one of those sessions, but you would get greater transfer to the bike, certainly, by doing a structured strength and conditioning session a week, based on, you know, you could a one strength exercise. So like you could do a loaded split squat, one power exercise, so some jump squats, some loaded jump squats, some structured core work. And then also looking, and Lucy, your testament to this is, you know, there's certain areas which cyclists, even when they are strength training, neglect, which we often think are really tight, but often there's a real strength deficit. So things like our hamstrings, our hip flexors, and our calves are, we don't give them any special attention, and then there are areas that often get injured. So stuff like especially hip flexors, I find is one. So doing specific work, accessory work on those would be really beneficial to you. Yes, certainly.
Cool. Yeah, no, because during lockdown, I lost all access to the gym, so I didn't do any gym work, and I just, yeah, my form on the bike went completely down. And just in the last, say, 5 to 6 weeks, I've been doing those classes, and I can feel myself getting stronger, but I just think I'm reaching a plateau. So
yeah, you will, like we said, you know, there's a point past which we've got to add load. So yeah. You know, if you're a reasonably strong guy, then that's going to happen pretty quickly. So, you know, you need to address that with another form of strength training.
I think the great thing with your strength training programs is there's that element of mobility and activation to start with. And I think that's a huge thing that we're lacking as cyclists. If you can't get into position on the bike that is going to produce power, then even if you are strong and powerful, it's completely wasted. You know, especially if you're down on the drops, you're ducking out of the wind, you know, you're trying to sustain an aero position for a period of time and everything just gets sore. Pain inhibits muscles. So if you haven't got the flexibility to sustain good posture or good position on the bike, your power is wasted anyway. So I think there should always be an element of mobility and flexibility. And you guys were saying about you've got that yoga class once a week, which I think is brilliant. But there's also, you know, doing stuff like Chris's program, but there's loads of things online, yoga, you know, and yoga with Adrienne is a good example, quick 20-minute burst a few times a week. It's been a game changer for me, because, and it even helps with the strength training, because if you can get into the positions, because you've got more flexibility, and no offense to men, but men notoriously are a lot stiffer and tighter in their hamstrings and their hips than women. So and they will then struggle to perform a good quality deadlift or a good quality squat. So I think
absolutely, listen, I think, you know, a warm up and some mobility before going on a long ride, and then, you know, it takes 3 or 4 minutes, and you know, looking at a bit of hip mobility, a little bit of thoracic spine mobility, and some glute activation before getting on the bike, and then, you know, at the end, you know, just before you have your coffee and cake, you know, again, just like a 2 or 3 minute mobility flow. And if you regularly do that, again, consistency, it will certainly go a long way to helping you move better and ultimately ride better.
And recover quicker, I found as well. Now I feel like I'm moving better. I feel like I don't get that like hobbling down the stairs the morning after a hard ride where your calves are really sore, everything's really tight. So I find I just recover quicker now. I'm a bit stronger and a bit more mobile.
Do you, out of curiosity, I can imagine you do this, Chris, but do you do it for your Swift stuff as well? Do you do the mobility pre and post as well?
Yes. Yeah.
And
I try to depend. Yeah. Sometimes post is more of a lying on the ground, feeling sorry for myself. But yeah, yeah. I certainly try to. You know, and as Lisa, and as I've got older, you know, hitting sort of mid-40s, and I've got to look after my body better. You know, I've got to, you know, I can't get away with not doing mobility work like I could 10 years ago. I have to include it if I want to get the best out of time on the bike, but also just not hurt. So, you know, spending time doing, you know, dedicating 5-10 minutes to it a day, certainly I find has had a really positive impact.
Does anybody have any other questions or queries? So I'm going to have to ask a couple of more questions if we don't. Silence. Anthony, Dan, do you have any questions at all? Take that as a no. So obviously you mentioned a lot of the power and rest. How does that work? 'Cause obviously, I guess obviously if you do a power move, you rest for a couple of minutes, is that right? And you do that again. But what does your body, I guess it's maybe quite an obvious question, but what does your body do in that rest period? How does it recover so you're able to perform at that kind of that power point again?
So there's an element of sort of neural recovery more than anything else. So it's allowing the nervous system to recover, to produce that high force with those high threshold motor units again. You know, I think, you know, what I try to do with programming and what I try to encourage people to do is we're not, you know, doing 3 or 4 reps of a power exercise and then doing nothing in between. There's certainly a lot we can do with that time that's still allowing our body to recover. So that's when we add in some sort of corrective exercise, some mobility work. So it's not, you know, it's not 3 reps, sit on a bench for 2 or 3 minutes. We're trying to make the most of the time in the gym. But you know, the primary focus is increasing rate of force production, and in order for that to happen, we need to allow full predominantly neural recovery in order to do that. You know, if you did a test and you measured vertical jump height, and then you tried to jump as high as you could again after 30 seconds, you know, you're going to get a much lower height and therefore lower force production. So it's you know, 2 to 3 minutes is the sort of optimal time that's going to allow us to repeat that effort to the same intensity.
Okay. And another question is, obviously Adam talked about previous, he's got previous with his body and that kind of stuff. Obviously a lot, like many of us, for example, I've got no ACL in my right knee, that kind of stuff, and previous injuries. How do you, obviously people can be quite tentative going into the gym. What's that process of giving that person that belief that they're doing the right thing, and that injury, for example, my injury won't flare up. Well, it can't get any worse, but
so from my perspective with a new client, I'll do a movement screen, and I find out their training history and their injury history. Now, if I think there's something that is beyond my skill set, then I will always refer out to a physio and, you know, get their input before we go into a strength training program, because I want to make sure that they're in the best possible condition in order to address that. But with most injuries, certainly stuff like an ACL, then, you know, getting stronger is hugely beneficial. You know, you want that strength, that stability around your knee joint. You no longer have your ACL there to provide that, you know, that prevention of that anterior movement of the lower legs. So, you know, we need muscle mass in order to keep it strong. And that goes for quite a lot of injuries. You know, the stronger and more robust we can be, then you know, I think the healthier we are going forward.
And to reassure people, I think that, you know, the more structured that program is and the more progressive, the less likely they are going to have problems with that injury. I think that the majority of the times that people fail rehab from injuries like an ACL, there's obviously lots of different examples, but let's take ACL for an example, is because they underload it. Everyone's just so nervous and they would do too little weight, too little reps. And then they go, but the exercise didn't work. Well, it's because you never did it hard enough. You know, I always explain it like people's circle of tolerance or circle of load. If what you're demanding of your body is outside of that, and you're only strengthening to this size, and what you want to do is go for a 100-mile ride, and that's out here, and your strength is in here, you're going to fail at that 100-mile ride. Something's going to fail. Whereas if you build that circle of tolerance by building up your strength and your capacity for loading your tendons and your muscles, then that ride is then within your capacity. So it's all about making sure that what you are asking of your body, you've got the capability of, and strength training allows you to do that. And often, I think where we fail patients with injuries is because we are not brave enough to push them in a sensible, progressive way to meet the demands of what they want from their life.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you know, the advantage of having a structured training program is that, you know, those progressions are monitored, are controlled, and we are gradually loading to a greater degree. I think going the other way, you know, people will do a couple of gym sessions and they're like, well, I used to deadlift 120, so I'm going to have a crack at it now. Exactly. You know, we can go the other way, but, you know, having some structure to your training program, you know, you go in and you're like, well, this is what I'm doing today, and I know within, you know, the realms of what I'm doing, this is going to have the positive effect, and, you know, and stimulate me enough to get the adaptations we want, but not push you too hard so you're going to get injury. So it's just getting that balance right.
Absolutely.
And obviously people love seeing progress, obviously, like I talked about a hill climb earlier on. How do you monitor that, Chris? How do you say, right, today do you do that? Or is that part of the process, or is that nothing?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially you can get caught up in chasing numbers, especially in the gym. Yeah. So I will, depending on the person, make sure that they are progressing with load and progressing with complexity of exercises. And then, yeah, there is a point where we can test. We can use, you know, a simple broad jump test. We can use a vertical jump test to look at force production. And it is also very apparent on the bike. I mean, you can see, if you're using a watt meter, you can see pretty quickly, you know, if you can produce more force. So it's a case of sort of an individualized approach to clients, and then, you know, making sure you're getting plenty of feedback from them.
I think I did a 5 second and maybe a 30.
Yeah, you did a 5 and 30 seconds, but power test,
which I did pre-programming. So at some point we do
You've got that in a week.
Oh, do I? Good. Got that to look forward to.
The bombshell. Public.
No pressure.
Yeah, so peak power, 5 second power and 20-second power, and what, like a sort of standardized cycling based test that we can use to sort of to monitor that progress.
That's very interesting. Really interesting. Does anybody have any other questions or queries for Chris or Lucy? I guess now we've interrupted Lucy to ask me physio questions. Guess that silence is no. Lucy, do you have any questions at all?
No, I'm good.
Thank you very much, Chris. I really appreciate it. I found it really useful.
No, absolute pleasure.
And I think
thank you, Lucy, for your input.
Right. Great catching up you both.
And then what I'll do is, obviously, when we do the news article, I'll put this in and then put all your links and email address and Instagram stuff, so people get in contact with you.
Lovely.
Yeah, but I really appreciate it, Chris. Thank you very much for spending Friday night. I hope you get on the bike tomorrow, if weather dependent.
That's the plan. Thank you guys, much appreciated.
Cheers.
Thanks, Chris. That's great.
That was really interesting. Cheers.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Chris. See ya. Bye.
Thanks. That was great.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bye. Bye all.